Aileen Wuornos is a notorious name in American criminal history, known for being a serial killer who murdered 7 men in Florida in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Her case sparked public interest and controversy, as Wuornos's life and upbringing were marred by poverty, abuse, and neglect, which some believe contributed to her violent actions. Early life and childhood. Born in Rochester, Michigan in 1956, Aileen Wuornos had a difficult childhood. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was just 15 years old when she gave birth to Aileen, and her father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a convicted child molester who abandoned the family before Aileen was born. Diane was unable to care for Aileen and her older brother, Keith, and the children were put up for adoption when Aileen was just 6 months old. Aileen's adoptive parents, Laurie and Britta Wuornos, were strict and abusive, and Aileen claimed that her father sexually abused her from a young age. She was expelled from school at age 14 and later gave birth to a child, whom she put up for adoption. By the age of 18, Aileen had left home and began working as a prostitute to support herself. The murders and motives. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men, all of whom she claimed had raped or attempted to rape her while she worked as a prostitute. Wuornos shot each of her victims multiple times with a .22 caliber pistol and stole their belongings and cars. While Wuornos claimed that her actions were in self-defense, prosecutors argued that her motive was financial gain. Wuornos had a history of theft and fraud, and many of her victims were found with their wallets emptied. Despite her claims of self-defense, Wuornos was convicted of first-degree murder for 6 of the 7 killings and was sentenced to death in 1992. Capture and sentencing. Wuornos was captured in January 1991 after police traced one of her victims' cars to a pawn shop where Wuornos had sold it. She was initially arrested on an outstanding warrant for an earlier armed robbery, but during questioning, she confessed to the murders. Wuornos was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for each in 1992. She appealed her conviction several times, claiming that she was mentally unstable and that her confession had been coerced by police. However, her appeals were unsuccessful, and Wuornos was executed by lethal injection in 2002. The victim whose car led to Aileen Wuornos's capture was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner. Wuornos killed Mallory on November 30, 1989, and took his car, which she later sold to a pawn shop. The pawn shop owner, suspicious of the transaction, contacted the police, who traced the car back to Wuornos and arrested her on an outstanding warrant for an earlier armed robbery. During questioning, Wuornos confessed to Mallory's murder and eventually to 6 other murders. Conclusion. Aileen Wuornos's case remains controversial, with some arguing that her difficult upbringing and experiences as a prostitute contributed to her violent actions. Others point to her criminal history and financial motives as evidence that she was a calculating killer. Whatever the case, Wuornos's story is a tragic reminder of the impact that childhood trauma and neglect can have on individuals, and the devastating consequences that can result from a life of poverty and abuse.